Harry Potter is quite punk rock when you think about it. He was a rule breaker, sometimes to a serious fault, but he was the kind of wild card that was needed to take on not only Voldemort, but the institutional corruption of the Ministry of Magic. Sometimes it takes a supposedly bad apple to take care of the rot. But was Harry really all that bad? He gets a bad reputation these days for being a bit of a thriving on praise that should have gone to other characters and generally acting both like a brat and a danger to others. But that's sort of to be expected. Not only was Harry the product of intense, inconceivable trauma, but he was also literally infected with the slither of the most evil wizard of all time's soul. The fact that he was even able to resist being outright evil at all is actually pretty remarkable. That said, he did also pull some pretty unforgivable stuff in his time at Hogwarts. I'm Simon from WhatCulture.com, and this is the 10 worst things Harry Potter has ever done. Number 10, got Sirius killed. To create a good hero, you have to sprinkle in a bit of a roguish element along with a strong moral code. You have to be willing to bend rules for the greater good, in other words. Unfortunately, when you're a petulant, volatile child with a history of making overly emotional mistakes, you can also fall into the trap of wrongly identifying which rules you're supposed to ignore. Take Harry ignoring Sirius Snape's occlumency lessons despite Dumbledore's insistence, simply because he didn't like Snape. As well as spying on his most personal moments, Harry sabotages those invaluable lessons through apathy and gives Voldemort the key to trapping him in the Department of Mysteries, which leads directly to Sirius Death's Black. He didn't cast the fatal spell on Black, but if he just paid attention properly, he'd still be alive. And on top of that, he also failed to look after the mirror Sirius gave him, the most precious of gifts from the most precious of people, which would have allowed him to make sure Sirius wasn't in danger. It's just idiotic. Number 9, he mistreated Colin CREEVEY. Colin CREEVEY's only crime against Harry Potter was adoration. Sure, the idea of him buzzing around the notoriously fame-shy Harry would have been enough to annoy him, but Harry treats the youngster with a level of disdain that he absolutely does not deserve. He and his brother make support Harry Potter badges for the Triwizard Tournament. He offered Harry company when he wasn't allowed to go to Hogsmeade, which Harry rejected by lying and saying he needed to return a book to the library, and he joined the DA. He literally put his life on the line to believe Harry Potter when some of his closest friends doubted him, and still Harry just found him annoying. In the end, Colin ends up being killed in the Battle of Hogwarts, and Harry expresses sadness at seeing his little broken body in the aftermath of the battle. But he was pretty much partly responsible for his death. Number 8, he was a bad father to Albus. After everything that went down with Voldemort, you'd have thought that Harry might have mellowed in later life and become more acutely aware of the value of life. But Harry, who admittedly grew up with absolutely the worst model for fatherhood in Vernon Dursley, and several others who either manipulated him for the greater good or died promptly, ends up treating his middle son, Albus Severus, remarkably poorly in The Cursed Child. After he's sorted into Slytherin, something Harry says would be absolutely fine and in no way ruin their relationship, Harry struggles to connect with his son to the point that he lets his emotions get the better of him and tells him he sometimes wishes he wasn't his son. "You're an adult, Harry." In the end, he rebuilds that connection, but it's partly Harry's emotional neglect that drives Albus' story, and that sort of rejection, even fleeting, tends to stick with kids. Number 7, he bought the entire snacks trolley. Look, nobody's going to stand here and say that Harry flashing his newly gotten riches on the Hogwarts Express and buying Ron lots of treats wasn't a boss move guaranteed to make him best friends for life. But it's remarkably short-sighted. Harry and Ron could easily have gorged themselves on a few chocolate frogs, a pumpkin pasty or two each, several packets of Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, a few cauldron cakes, maybe some Drooble's best blowing gum, lots of jelly slugs and licorice ones. Harry could have spent a fair bit on getting them enough to feel thoroughly sick, and crucially, he could have left some for the rest of the students. Basically, what I'm saying is, Harry could have spent a fair bit on getting them enough to feel thoroughly sick, but crucially, he could also have left some for the rest of the students on the train to eat. But no. Instead, Harry thinks not of any other children and insists on taking the lot, in a fit of blinkhead selfishness we would come to expect from his time at Hogwarts. Number 6, his colossal sulk in 5th year. Harry is petulant and passionate and quick to emotion, and that's sort of part of the reason why he made a good chosen one. Add those characteristics to the boiling cauldron of his adolescence, and you get the recipe for Harry also being a bit of a sulky. Now, it's understandable that Harry would react to being isolated from his friends and the rest of the Order, but the safest place for him was always with the Dursleys, as he was aware, and Ron and Hermione are under strict instructions not to let him know too much. On top of that, he reacts to Dumbledore isolating him like a rejected lover. further rejecting anyone's attempts to protect him because he apparently knows best. Ultimately, that insistence proves to be as dumb as it sounds. Though it has to be said that Dumbledore isn't without blame for failing to give Harry any information at all. Number 5. How he treats girls. Considering Harry ends up getting the girl and we cheer for their romance, he doesn't have a good track record with relationships. Hell, up to the point where he and Ginny get together, he doesn't even have a good track record with her. First, Harry becomes infatuated with Cho and is jealous of her and Cedric, but that's pretty harmless. What isn't harmless is the way he treats Parvati Patil, his actual date to the Yule Ball, when Cho chooses to go with Cedric. He couldn't be more disrespectful of her, and the same goes for Ron and Padma, and his behaviour basically ruins what should have been a magical event for her. Later, he's incredibly jealous of Ginny having boyfriends. When he sees Dean Thomas kissing her, he's suddenly taken by a savage urge to jinx Dean into a jelly. And when he actually ends up with Cho, he's awful to her, rejecting how upset she is still pretty soon after Cedric's death, and telling her not to cry because he has enough to cope with. Empathetic, he is not. Number 4. When he mistreated his friends and robbed one. Harry's treatment of Hermione and Ron is pretty tumultuous, and there's only so much of it you can blame on childish passions running high between very close people. Hermione gets the worst of it when Harry greets her revelation that she's had to fight off a lecherous Cormac McLaggen who has literally made her look distinctly dishevelled, rather as though she's had to fight her way out of a thicket of devil's snare with "serves you right for coming with him." So she was asking for it, Harry, was she? And then there's Neville, who might be the victim of Harry's most callous crime. When the Chosen One sneaks into Honeydukes under the invisibility cloak, he could have his pick of the countless sweet treats in there, but instead, he chooses to steal Neville's lollipop and then taunt him by walking away with it. He doesn't even eat it, because it would disappear under the cloak. He's doing it out of pure malice for his own entertainment. Some friend. Number 3. When he blew up Aunt Marge. If you think that Aunt Marge was an innocent victim of the sadistic violence of an out-of-control magical lunatic, you're probably overcompensating somewhat. Well, either that or your surname is Dursley. She was a bad egg, to say the least, and her disdain for Harry is pretty unforgivable. Does that mean she deserved to be put through the trauma of being inflated like a grotesque balloon and sent off into the atmosphere? Absolutely not. The punishment, which would have come with some serious short-term medical side effects at the very least, simply does not fit the crime. Yes, it's funny, but it's the kind of behaviour that you'd expect to see of the Malfoys, cruel, sadistic, and not exactly befitting a Gryffindor hero who you'd want to see rise above. Number 2. When he used unforgivable curses. Here's a test for you. When is it okay to use unforgivable curses? If you answered anything other than never, you've not been reading your Harry Potter lore correctly. Because unforgivable means in no circumstances. You'll notice basically no other heroic characters use them. There's even some question of whether Molly Weasley uses it against Bellatrix Lestrange, since the result of her killing strike doesn't quite fit what we know of Avada Kedavra. And yet, Harry happily uses the Imperius Curse on Bogrod in the Gringotts heist, despite knowing that the cost of using it poorly would be the destruction of their minds, and then also casts at least 2 Cruciatus curses, once on Bellatrix, once on the Death Eater who spits in McGonagall's face. The second time he uses Crucio, he admits he really did mean it and successfully uses it, which he couldn't when he used it on Bellatrix, even though she had just killed Sirius. So the point here is he was actually getting more proficient with use over time. So that's an expert in forbidden evil spells. That's not exactly very fitting of a hero, is it? Number 1. When he used SECTUMCEMPRA on Malfoy. What can be worse than using 2 spells classified as unforgivable for the greater good? Well, using a mysterious spell you have absolutely no idea about that you found written in a book annotated by somebody calling themselves the Half-Blood Prince. That's not the sort of name a nice morally sound person calls themselves, is it? And it even states outright that it's only to be used against enemies. While Draco Malfoy might be a bit of the idea of him being at the same level as the enemies of somebody who goes around with a Voldemort-like sinister nickname is pretty insane. And yet, Harry doesn't pause before he unleashes the spell on Draco when the two of them duel for real. The result sees Malfoy's body lacerated and his blood seeping out at an alarming rate, to the extent that he would have died if not for dramatic medical assistance, and all because Harry didn't think about the potentially grave consequences of a completely unregulated, unknown spell. The idiot. So what other devilish things belong on this list? I've been Simon from WhatCulture.com. This was the 10 worst things Harry Potter ever did. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.